I would say right now, thank you for taking over last week, or 2 weeks ago. If I had known, if I had known that we would be canceling services last week, last minute because of the floods, I wouldn't have done that to you. But as it is, it gave me 2 weeks to kind of sit down and focus and meditate. And I don't know if you can tell, I'm coming back just a bit happier. Not happy. It's not that I'm unhappy, but it's like stronger, a little bit more focus. When you do it week in, week out, eventually you get kind of tired. So it's good to be back. I am putting together a series of notes about the book of James. And I was writing because my goal, I'm kind of in a weird place right now. I'm in a weird place right now because Pesach is in 2 weeks and a day. 2 weeks and a day. Pesach is in 2 weeks. And then after Pesach, between Pesach and Shavuot, that's traditionally when we teach about things like Pirkei Avot. And this year, I want to develop our teaching on Pirkei Avot with the book of James. So this leaves me in a weird place. Do I get started now and kind of just say, we'll just ignore it, smudge that detail, and does that mean that next week I teach on Pesach? So I'm going to start the James series this week, and then teach on Pesach next week, and then go back to James and Pirkei Avot in 2 weeks, or 3 weeks. It didn't really work. So what I'm going to do is, but this is the crazy thing. I'm putting together my notes about the book of James. And I'm really excited about the series. And I opened up an older project, and I thought we need to go over this first before we go over the book of James. So it's occurring to me, the more I do this Messianic Jewish walk, that there are really 3 divisions. I used to say there were 2 divisions. I'm now starting to see 3 in the spectrum of Messianic Judaism. And this teaching is not entirely my own. It was first hinted at by a man named the Koblenzer Rebbe. Is anyone here familiar with the Koblenzer Rebbe? He's a chaplain in the prison system, but he's a Hasidic Jew, and I think he's the only one who serves in that capacity. But he made a video post, and he said that there are 3 branches of Messianic Judaism. Now, he is not Messianic Jewish, quite the contrary. But he seems to have respect for us. And he said, I'm going to bring up a taboo issue. He said, let's talk about Messianic Judaism. And he said, there are really 3 groups of these people. And I'm going to give you my names, because in my opinion, he picked wrong names. I think he said, there's the Jewish heretics, the evangelicals in disguise, and then there's the true Jews. I'm going to put it into different vocabulary because he clearly doesn't know his terminology quite to the level we would here. First, there's the Hebrew roots. Hebrew roots, sola scriptura to the extreme. Completely disregard church tradition and rabbinic tradition for a very literal translation of the Bible. The problem with that is you can't have a strictly literal interpretation of Scripture. You need to fill it in with something. So very often they invent their own midrashim, their own legends and mythology and ways of understanding things. They're the types who will restore the sacred name of God, but also reinvent the holidays and say we're going to make a new calendar. That's the Hebrew roots. That's the first group. He would call that the Jewish heretics. The second group is this is where I'm starting to fall, where my theology is becoming more refined. Next, I would say there was Hebrew roots and Messianic Judaism. And in Messianic Judaism, there's a spectrum where it's more observant of the Jewish lifestyle or more of a Sunday Christian approach. And that there's a spectrum here. I'm starting to realize that they're actually just 2 different movements. And both are blessed. And people are called to either one. So what you have, for the lack of a better term, is Messianic Orthodoxy and like an evangelical Messianic movement. And they're both good. They are both good. I could go into either one of these congregations and be comfortable. Most of my life, I've been in more of an evangelical Messianic world. But later on in my life, there was a strong calling to go into more of an observant Orthodox Messianic Jewish world. And so I have over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, strongly transitioned from one into the next. But I have no hard feelings. I'm not here to disparage anyone. But I'm starting to realize that they are two different movements. And they're going in two different directions because they have two different convictions. They come from two different worlds. And I'd say that this rise of evangelical, the Messianic evangelical world came from the 60s. The more observant Orthodox Messianic world, it actually came from the late 1800s. And I want to talk a bit about this. What is Messianic Orthodoxy? Because it's complicated. And it's going to lead us well into the James series. So I have a definition here. Messianic Orthodoxy. It is the belief that Jesus of Nazareth, a Torah-observant Jew, taught his Jewish brothers and sisters. He was the most observant and pious Jew of his generation. Stop right there. Very often in the Sunday church, we portray Jesus as a rebel-rouser, as a Torah defiler, as someone who hated all forms of tradition. I think a close reading of the Gospels will show that he was not. This definition works only in the understanding that Mashiach was pious and observant. This one belief defines all of Messianic Judaism. Whether you come from the more evangelical world or the Orthodox world, we have to agree together that he was a very good Jew. He observed Torah, he loved Torah. So if you come from a Messianic world where you think that you can light candles on the Sabbath because it shows freedom from the law, that's a real thing that's happened here in Tennessee, you are not following the example of the Messiah. The Messiah loved Torah. Everything else regarding our observance, our mitzvot, and our minhagim stem from the single understanding of the Mashiach. But then you might say, well, wait, everyone agrees with this. Even the Hebrew roots world agrees with that. No, they don't. Even the evangelical kind of side of things and the Orthodox, we all agree with that. What distinguishes Orthodoxy? This is the distinguishing factor. Beyond this shared foundation, Messianic Orthodoxy identifies with the Jerusalem congregation. That is the topic of today in the next several weeks. The Jerusalem congregation. The one led by James the Just and the 12 apostles. I'm going to say it again. The Messianic Jewish community was led by James the Just and the 12 apostles. It was a continuation. It was the same community as Messiah's original followers. They continued his lifestyle and his teachings as a part of the Jewish community. And I'm going to go over a few features of the Jerusalem congregation. They are the primary focus of Acts chapter 1 through 8. During this time, the movement grows, spreads out, and then continues to grow. In Acts 15, this is very telling. In Acts 15, the Gentile world needed guidance. The Gentile Christian community needed guidance. So they defaulted to the Jerusalem congregation, their leaders. And the Jerusalem congregation came up with an answer for them. And then in Acts 21, we see now the Jerusalem congregation has grown into thousands upon thousands. They're zealous for Torah and following the Messiah. So those are our main snapshots of the Messianic Jewish world, the Jerusalem congregation. It's Acts 1 through 8, Acts 15, where they made an executive decision, and then Acts 21. Here are just a few traits of this early community. The Jerusalem congregation were steadfastly dedicated to praying. They worship in the temple. Acts 21 even shows them offering sacrifices. They kept the Torah. They practiced circumcision, Brit Milah. And they kept the oral law, which they called the traditions in Acts 21. They were a steadfastly devout group of individuals. I would also say this. The Jerusalem congregation was taken from the body of Messiah's followers, and we have been teachers of lawlessness ever since. The Messiah prophesied this. He prophesied it. He said, do not throw your pearls, that is, the pearls of Torah, do not throw them to the pigs. In other words, don't give them to Rome. Pig is a code word for Rome. He says, do not give your pearls of Torah to Rome, lest Rome will trample them and turn and tear you to pieces. What happened? Our leadership transitioned from Jerusalem to Rome in the form of Catholicism, and Rome destroyed Jerusalem. The church has been suffering and reeling under the loss of the Jerusalem congregation for the last 2 millennia. But the Messiah made a profound prophecy. He said in Matthew 19:28 that one day the 12 apostles would resurrect, and that they would sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. The way I understand this is that the Jerusalem congregation, as it was intended, will come back in full force. And it will resume its place as the head of Messiah's global body. And the scripture prophesies this. It says, all the nations will go up to receive the word of the Lord, to hear the law of the Lord. And it says, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah. The law will go forth from Zion, Udvar Hashem Yerushalayim, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. You might ask me, was this congregation perfect? No. But they were what we were intended to be. My one complaint about them is I don't think they wrote down enough. I think they could have written down a lot more about their lifestyle and who they were and everything else about them. I also don't think that they made a long-term plan for Gentile inclusion. Why do I say that? Well, I think my suspicion is that the fathers believed that Jesus was coming back a lot sooner than he did. And so I don't think they made a lot of long-term plans. I think if they, and I could be wrong, but I think that if the original congregation had any idea that we'd still be here 2,000 years later, they would have probably put pen to paper and said, let's start writing a constitution for the long term. I could be wrong. I might be completely wrong in that. That's just my personal opinion. Because I feel like there's a lot of guesswork and there's a lot of having to piece things together in the modern world to understand who these people are. So understand that in some capacity, this form of Messianic Orthodoxy that we see rising up, they take a lot of inspiration from the Jerusalem Council. And so when I look at a congregation that verges more toward Orthodoxy, and I keep in mind, I'm not saying we're Orthodox Jews here, far from it. But what I'm saying is it's kind of like a direction, a trajectory of our movement. It's getting more observant. And I see these two directions. So what do we emphasize? As in ancient times, Messianic Orthodoxy emphasizes mitzvot. Everyone say mitzvot. 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 It means commands. Every once in a while I'll hear something like mitzvat. It's mitzvot. Ot is the plural. It's the plural of mitzvah, command. It emphasizes mitzvot and Torah living. Our lives revolve around study, prayer, and discipline. Oh boy, aren't I fun? Study, prayer, and discipline. I remember in the early days of me teaching here, our numbers were going down, down, down. And I asked Greg, the guy above me, I said, why are our numbers going down? Why does no one seem to like this? And he said, Quentin, he said, you're doing a series on the disciplines. He said, no one wants to hear this. And he said, I only do a teaching like this once every couple months because if I do it, then they don't want to come back. And I heard that. Do you know what I did? I continued my series about disciplines. Because if you don't want to hear about the disciplines, you don't need to be here. Go bowling. Go watch TV. Our lives are in the disciplines. Our relationship with God is all about discipline. And he convicted me recently and said, you've lost your discipline. You've gotten sloppy. And I realized he was right. He didn't say that. I felt convicted of it. I realized it. You want to know why your walk with God is stagnating? It could be that you lack discipline. The discipline to study, the discipline to pray. And I know that when I say the word discipline, we sometimes get very upset, like, oh, that's so heavy, that's so hard. These are our greatest joys. They are our time with God. If you don't like the word discipline, then find another word. Our practices. This is our way of life. What's that term? The means of grace. I think that's what the Anglicans say. Means of grace. But our lives are about study and prayer and discipline. Study, prayer, and discipline. I love it when I'm here on Wednesday mornings and like Juan and Gabriel can join me for the prayers. I love it when we can crack open a book and study together. I love it. These are our things. I love it when we can practice Torah. I love it when we practice our cantillation. The other thing that I would say is a defining quality of the Messianic congregation is we are focused on what we do believe. Now, this is tricky because I see this a lot, and I don't see it here. And I'm glad to say I don't see it here. But I want to address it anyway. Very often in the kind of the Messianic world, you will find people who are drawn to Messianic Judaism not because they love Torah, not because they love God, not because they love Torah and not because they love Israel, but because they really, really hate Sunday Christianity. They hate Sunday worship, they hate Easter and Christmas and Lent. And I'll be honest, those things really aren't for me. They don't do much for me. Of course. But I don't hate them. I don't sit around and brew because of these practices that are not Jewish or technically extra-biblical. And what happens is these people very often gravitate toward Messianic congregations. And they'll think that we're against everything just the same as they are. And then they find out, oh, this congregation is not founded on hatred. And I'll say this without placing names. There have been a few of those congregations here since I started teaching. A few of those congregations in Clarksville. Do I need to tell you what happens to a congregation that comes together because they just hate everything? Do I need to tell you what happens? They hate each other and then they disband into small home groups. And I've seen this happen again and again and again. It's okay to say that we don't care for the Sunday traditions. But on the other hand, that can't be what our movement is founded on. We have to have love for the body of Messiah. So let me ask you this. What brings you here? Is it a love for Torah? Is it a love for God? Is it a love for Judaism? Or is it just that I really can't stand that Sunday thing? It's true. I have all these questions, and I've written responses to all of them. Here's one. You would have a much larger congregation if you would ... Cut it off there. We are not about growing the size of our congregation, but growing the people. We strive to retain the depth of the original Messianic congregation, the original stages. If we are going to rediscover the hidden treasures of Messiah that he gave his original Jerusalem congregation. Ironically, if we focus on maturing our congregation instead of increasing our numbers, I have found that more people actually end up attending. People who are ready for maturity, deep teaching, and obeying the commandments. Go figure. If we compromise the message for the masses, then we have actually no maturity and we'll have a smaller, less powerful congregation. I am really, really not into dumbing down the message. Now, there's a difference between dumbing something down and making it accessible. We need to make things accessible, but I am not a fan of dumbing things down. Let's keep things healthy. Let's keep things where they belong. All right? I can't imagine James and Paul and Peter getting together and saying, gosh, this is too hard. Let's make this nice and easy for everyone. They write some complicated stuff. Even Peter was looking at Paul saying, this guy's complex. It's easy to misinterpret what he's trying to say. James was a mystic. And the more I get into his writings, the more I realize this guy's deep. I wasn't prepared for this when I got into it. I thought it would be kind of a simple teaching, like a long teaching, but I thought it'd be simpler. This guy's mysterious. I love him. I look at the writings of John. John's a prophet. John was another leader in the Jerusalem congregation. John, he's too complicated for me. I'm reading him. I'm saying, okay, this connects here, 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 here. I feel like I could just like draw a chart of all the verses in John and like attach them with strings so I could see where they all connect. He's complicated. He's very, and they present these deep teachings, and our goal is to take these deep teachings and make them accessible. But don't say it's too hard. Should everyone live a Messianic Jewish lifestyle? My simple answer is no. It's a calling. It's a unique one. And, well, here's one. And this is a loaded question. And my answer is different from a lot of people who surround me. But I'll say it with conviction, they're wrong. I'll say it with conviction, they're wrong. What is the place of Gentiles within Messianic Judaism? Guys, that the prophet says that the nations, the Gentiles, would go to Jerusalem and learn the law of the Lord. They're not learning it just to tickle their brains. They're learning it to take it back to their countries, back to their homes. The Jew cannot exist without the Gentile cannot exist without the Jew. We need each other. Our roles complement each other. Scripture says that one day there would be congregations of 10 Gentiles to 1 Jew. We're seeing that fulfilled in the modern day. 10 Gentiles to 1 Jew. That's Zechariah 8:23. I believe that God is calling Gentiles into Messianic Judaism, get this, because of the faithlessness of Israel. Because of the faithlessness of Israel. So many Jews are faithless to the Sinai covenant that God is saying, looking down from heaven, saying, you don't care about my mitzvot? You don't care about my covenant? Fine. I'll find someone who does. And he looks over here and he says, oh, David and Ruth, they look like they'd be comfortable in Israel. He brings you to Israel. Anatoly, he lives on the other side of Nashville. Let's bring him to Kerem Hashem. Nick and Karen, all of us understand that God is bringing us into one. Why? Because our ranks have to be filled out for the days of the Mashiach. And so I would say that there is a prophetic happening occurring right now in our lifetimes where Gentiles are being called into Messianic Judaism. And so my answer is we have to all observe the commandment together. I say that because you have a lot of people who want to say a Jewish purist movement. And I'm saying no, we have to embrace diversity. That's my personal opinion. And you might ask me, what about Gentiles who are not called to Messianic Judaism? Do you have a relationship with them? My answer is yes, absolutely. We have to teach law. That's the difference between like an evangelical form of Messianic Judaism and a more observant Orthodox form of Messianic Judaism. The more evangelical world will go to churches and teach about the end times or the Jewish Jesus and Passover. But I've noticed that people who tend more toward Orthodoxy, when they go to Sunday church, what are they teaching? They're teaching the law. They're teaching this is how we live. These are the commandments. This is what is expected, what is incumbent upon a Sunday church, upon a Messianic Jewish congregation. Again, the law will go forth from Zion. The house of Israel has a responsibility to teach God's law to non-Jews. That's Deuteronomy 4:6. In Deuteronomy 4:6, God says, you'll be observing these commandments, and the other nations are going to see you, and they're going to say, what a wise and understanding nation. You see, Israel has a responsibility to show its light to the surrounding nations so that everyone can learn God's righteous standard and glorify God. That's the opening of the Sermon on the Mount. So I believe that one of Messianic Judaism's primary callings is to the Sunday church. Not to make them into Messianic Jews, but to teach them. Because right now, as I've said, the Sunday church is a center for lawlessness. And it's getting worse. We saw a flash of this prophetic reality in Acts 15, when all the Sunday churches, all the Gentile churches went to Jerusalem for leadership. So today, in keeping with the words of the prophets and the writings of Paul, we do not seek to convert Sunday Christians into Jews, but we seek to teach them the wisdom and life that flows from God's law. We are guides, not tyrants. We are shepherds. We are here to take God's law and present it and say, this is God's standard. And I'll tell you right now, we're going to see it in our lifetime. Another question I've been asked, and this one, just so you're aware, be ready for it. Are you with Jews for Jesus? And this one is extra triggering, so let me just clarify. Jews for Jesus is a missionary organization. In the Jews for Jesus world, a Jew who comes to believe in Jesus and now eats ham sandwiches because he believes in Jesus is a win. For me, I say, okay, good job on coming to meet Messiah, but you should not be meeting Messiah at the expense of the commandments. All right? You're now a Jew who eats ham sandwiches because you believe in Jesus? Okay, well, let's agree on Jesus, but let's put the ham sandwich down. You need to be honoring the commandments that was given to us because this is what the Messiah did and this is what he taught us. So, no, we're not with Jews for Jesus. I once had a Jewish fellow walk in here, and he thought we were just a normal synagogue. And when he realized who we were, you should have seen his eyes. And he said, "Are you with Jews for Jesus?" I said, I gave the answer I just gave you. I said, no. I said, they're a missionary organization. We agree with them about Messiah, but we're really serious about the commandments. And you know what he did? He listened, and he came back. And he came back for quite some time. He moved away. But as long as he was in Clarksville, he was with us, and he knew that he was safe. And I remember teaching the gospel right in front of him. But understand, it wasn't a facade to lure him in. He recognized there was a level of authenticity. And what I hope with all my heart, is he went back to his home, and now he's in his Reformed congregation, and he says, there are Messianic Jews out there who really love and care for us. It's not just a switch and bait to bring us to the Messiah. I hope that we can start to tear down walls. The Messianic Jewish community in the Jerusalem congregation existed as part of the Jewish community. It worshipped in the temple. It prayed 3 times a day. It was dedicated to Torah and to the apostles' teachings. It was dedicated to the Chavarah. If we're going to be a continuation of the Jerusalem congregation and recapture the essence of that original movement, here are some things that we need to be doing. And I actually write this. In my personal opinion, the Messianic Jewish world has been too quick to build synagogues. My personal opinion. We should have built minyans, prayer teams. That's the place to start. That way we can have all of our cracks filled in when it's time to build a synagogue. What's done is done. But these are some things that we require for just Torah life. Pray 3 times a day. Study 3 times a week, Monday, Thursday, Saturday. Teach our children Hebrew. Transliterations, not enough. We need to teach our next generation Hebrew. And then we need to study and perform mitzvot. Another one that I should have added onto that list, and I will later on, is we need to immerse ourselves into the writings of the Jerusalem leaders. What do I mean by this? If I so much as quote the book of James while teaching on the internet, people will get on and say, they'll say, we agree with you, but we're still saved by grace. There is such a knee-jerk reaction to the book of James and to the writings of the Jerusalem congregation, like the writings of Peter and even John. We take those writings and we shove them off to the end of the New Testament canon, and we just say, other writings. Paul, Pauline, up front, nice and shiny. Shove all the other guys off to the back and say, they're the other guys. They don't really count that much. And then we interpret the whole New Testament through the lens of the book of Romans. I believe that interpreting the whole New Testament through the book of Romans is arbitrary. We should be interpreting it through the writings of Jesus. And I love that because the book of James is like an expansion of the Sermon on the Mount. If you ask me, the book of James is actually a lot more powerful. It's not a battle, but if we're going to use a lens for the New Testament, the book of James is very powerful. We need to restore the writings of the Jerusalem congregation. So with that said, that is my objective. I am writing what I just read to you. We're putting it into a pamphlet. That's the first chapter out of like 4 or 5. But it's recapturing the essence of the Jerusalem congregation. And this is wonderful. What's the name of that chapter? Why is this congregation different from all other congregations? Because very often people will go into a Messianic congregation that has a lot of Hebrew and they'll say, what is this? Here's your question and answer guide. I'm working on it right now. But with that said, I'm using this as a launching point to go into the book of James. Because James, as we'll see next week, James the Just was the leader of the Jerusalem congregation. He was an incredibly righteous man. He was an incredibly pious man. He loved the Torah. He loved to pray. He actually immersed himself into the mikvah constantly. And he was so highly regarded by the people of Israel that he was allowed in the priest court right next to the temple. Only the priests are allowed there, but they allowed him to break through the ranks and pray next to the temple because their regard for him was so great. In fact, the people in Jerusalem had a title for James. I called him James the Just. But does anyone know what it is in Hebrew? Hazadik. People called him Hazadik, the righteous one. And it's this man that I'm going to try to recapture, recontextualize, and present to us in the weeks ahead. Because I think that what he says will have a lot of influence on how we perceive Messianic Judaism. And what is our movement, and what is our responsibility to the Sunday church, what is our responsibility to the nation of Israel. This should be a trip.